I want to talk about what is, I think, most timely for when this webinar is coming out, which is kind of a spring tune-up that I like to do on all of our windows. We, for a lot of our clients, will provide maintenance programs, which means spring is best, but fall is good too. But as long as you do it once a year, that's really what's most important. And there's two main things that we do in our window maintenance programs. The first is we come through and inspect glazing putty and make sure if there's any missing glazing putty. This is this, for example, is a very rough window. It's kind of fallen apart in a lot of ways. We pulled this out. We just keep it in our storeroom for demonstrations and things like this. But you want to look for any loose or missing glazing putty on here. This one has plenty. There's a lot of really rough putty. Rough putty doesn't necessarily pose an issue, but the missing putty causes problems for these windows. So the first thing I'm going to walk you through is the putty removal in some sections here, just doing some spot glazing, which is great for the seasonal stuff. Excuse me. And the second thing we'll go over is paint touch-up. So let's do some glazing putty removal right now. So the first thing you want to do is you want to look for weak points like that in your glazing putty. You don't need to remove all of this, but I can see that this section here has failed and is ready to come out. So I'm going to pull this out and ready it for new putty. The putty is really important in your air sealing process here. It keeps water from, it's at a nice bevel, so it keeps water from pooling right here. It allows it to sheet off of the sash. So if you've got it missing in places, it's just going to create a little place for the water to pool, and that's going to promote rot and premature failure. So I'm pulling this out. I've still got some of that epoxy repair we did earlier. And the rest of this, while not terribly attractive, seems pretty well in there. So clean this off. Now, if there is a little bit of old putty remaining, it's just fine. Old putty and new putty will bond to each other. And I like to use Sarco Multi-Glaze Type M. This works really well in the shop, but not so well in the field. It's not supposed to be exposed to ultraviolet rays while it's curing. It needs to be painted. So if you're going to be glazing in place, which, talking about these springtime repairs, I think that maybe Sarco Dual Glaze might be a better option for you. But you're just going to take some putty and a putty knife. I'm going to pack the putty back in here. And we're just doing some spot glazing repairs. It's really easy to do. Great way to up the efficiency of your windows and keep them lasting. So this is not as beautiful as what it would be if you're glazing, a restored window in the shop. But that's fine, because what we're talking about is extending the life of these windows. So dig off this excess putty. And once you're done with this, make your corners nice and neat. Once you're done with this, you'll want to be ready to paint this once it gets a good skin on it. You always want to wait till the putty gets a skin on it. Usually it depends on your weather, how warm it is, how much air is flowing around it. So if you've got relatively warm weather, then you should be ready for paint with Type M in just a few days, or with Dual Glaze if it's out on site within a couple weeks. But the way you'll know is that you'll feel a skin on top of the putty. Right now, as I feel this, it's super smooth and oily. When it's ready for paint, you'll feel kind of a, how do you describe it? It feels a little bit rougher. It feels maybe like 220 grit sandpaper. I'm sure everybody knows exactly what that feels like, but really it does feel like a very fine grit sandpaper. And that's how I know that it's ready. It turns a little bit of a deeper yellow too, and it's not as easily messed up with fingerprints. So once you've done these, you've laid in this putty, you're in pretty good shape for repairing this, and that's a nice springtime tune-up. Do that, let it sit, and then we'll come back and talk paint. All right, we've talked about epoxies, we've talked about hardware, we've talked about weather stripping, we have talked about spot glazing. Our Frankenstein window here is looking pretty good. Actually, it looks awful, but we're gonna make it look better in just a little bit. And the last thing you really need to know for a springtime tune-up that's super important is paint touch-up. It is often overlooked. Everybody talks about, hey, you know, I've got to use the best paint, I've got to use these extraordinary techniques. There's even companies like Rhino Shield or things like that are a permanent ceramic coating for your house. Don't mess with these different options, these weird options out there to try to avoid painting. It is just a fact of life that paint wears out. Paint's whole purpose on your house is to be a protective coating that wears out. When it wears out, it's like a case, think of it this way, it's like a case on your iPhone. The case is there to protect the iPhone. It's not there because the product is not really the case. The case is serving a purpose. Paint serves a purpose, especially on your old windows. It seals the putty. It seals these epoxy repairs. It seals the glass to the putty. It seals everything on these windows and keeps them in good working order. And when the paint fails, your job as the homeowner is to come through and touch up the paint. Now, you could do what a lot of people do, which is I'm gonna paint my house and I'm gonna leave it alone for 15 years and see what happens. But that results in a lot of issues where the paint is slowly gonna fail in areas. There's gonna be a storm and branches come and chip off part of the paint. Animals, you know, all kinds of critters come around your house. Paint fails in places. It doesn't fail all at once. It fails in small little places here and there, pinholes, large chunks, scrapes, cuts, things like that. So when those little things happen, and they're gonna happen throughout the year, it makes the most sense every spring or every fall, whenever you wanna do it. I recommend in the spring to get it done and come out just with a gallon of your paint and just walk around and spot touch up everything. So on this window, obviously once this putty was cured, we're gonna come through and touch that up. The epoxy, once it's sanded and cured, we're gonna come through and touch that up. But then there's little things, if you look at this window, like right here, there's just a small chip of paint. Not a big deal. How long would it take me to do that? If I've got my paintbrush in my bucket, I'm just gonna touch that up and move on. Again, it's not gonna be, you don't have to do perfect work on this. There's a difference between, you know, we'll always say in the trades, there's like best practices, and then there's average work, and there's subpar work. Sometimes subpar work is better than no work at all. So I'll put that out there. Some people may disagree with me, but I would rather come through and touch up the paint on this sash and have it done. Maybe I should spot prime that. Maybe I should sand the edges down to burn it in to make sure it looks just right. I should do that ultimately. But what's better is that I come through and just simply touch up the paint and keep it sealed for another season. And if you do that every year, if you go through one Saturday a year and just go through your house, all of it on the outside mostly. The inside paint chips, they're not a problem because the weather isn't getting into it. But what I think is most important is coming through once a year, put on some paint clothes, spend a Saturday out there, put your earphones on, listen to some music, and touch up the paint where you see it. It's gonna extend the life of these windows by decades, very easily. And it's gonna extend your paint job. Maybe your paint job in your neck of the woods is only gonna last 12 years. Maybe if you come through and touch it up, you're gonna get 15 or 16 years out of it. That's a significant savings, I think, especially when it comes to windows, where there's just a lot of nooks and crannies and crevices for water to get stuck. And when water gets stuck there, that's where we have problems. And I promise you, if anybody knows about water issues, it's us here in Florida. The termites, the rot, the things that we deal with since it rains every afternoon at 3 o'clock is something that I think the rest of the country could benefit from. There are woods we can't use down here for our windows because they'll rot too quickly that the rest of the country can. So, you know, anywhere that you've got water issues, you probably understand this already. For the rest of us who live in drier climates, it's good to know that if you can just keep this paint touched up, you'll be in good shape. So thanks so much. Take care of those windows, save those historic buildings, and till next time.